What's going on, guys? Let's talk Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad movie was really fun. It was a really good movie. Here's the funny thing though. I see a lot of people out there who are vocalizing complaints and kind of comparing it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, saying there's not really a lot of character development going on there. There's a reason for that. If you are familiar with the Suicide Squad comics, you know that James Gunn nailed the movie. And the reason for that is, sure, Rick Flag and Harley Quinn got a lot of screen time and we already knew who they were. We knew that they were basically gonna make it into the end. For the rest of the cast, Bloodsport and King Shark and Polka Dot Man, all that kind of stuff, we didn't really get a whole lot of backstory there. I mean, we did to a degree, right? We got kind of an origin for Polka Dot in the sense of like he's the result of his mom's experimentation, and some of his brothers and sisters lived, others died. He's got to spew out those polka dots twice a day, otherwise they'll consume him alive. So we got really more explanation on his story than we did pretty much anybody else. But you got what amounts to like quick little explanations, right? Amanda Waller said that Bloodsport basically put Superman in the ICU with a kryptonite bullet, and then the most we get outside of that is like the relationship between himself and his daughter's pretty strained, right? We don't even really get an origin for King Shark, but it's one of these things where you don't really get a whole lot going there, and there's a reason for that. So the Suicide Squad in DC Comics is designed to be, in effect, a throwaway team, and DC uses the Suicide Squad for a couple of different reasons. One is to sometimes boost the popularity of villains that exist in the DC landscape, because the team has really been popular since Harley Quinn was put on it, which makes sense because nobody would care about Suicide Squad if Harley Quinn wasn't on it. Or the other reason why they use it is to get rid of villains, right? To write them out. Here's a really good example. In recent years, DC Comics created a character named Punchline who was designed to replace Harley Quinn. No, it didn't work. Nobody cares. So what you'll likely see is that Punchline will be rolled over into the Suicide Squad relatively soon, and then she'll die like 3 or 4 issues after her first appearance, if not maybe 10 or so, right? But she'll die within 2 story arcs because DC is just writing her character out. And when she's dead, you'll never see or hear from her again. That's what they end up using it for. But the entire basis behind the Suicide Squad is, with the exception of Harley Quinn in the comics, is designed to be a rotating roster, that the villains who are on the team don't really matter because they're designed to be cannon fodder. And James Gunn nailed that with this movie. It's why when the movie opens up, literally the first team that you think is the Suicide Squad dies, which admittedly, I wish Michael Rooker had more time in that film. And now that I think about it, James Gunn, if you see this video, I really hope we get a prequel to the Suicide Squad that takes place between the terrible one that had Will Smith and this great one that you made, that basically gives us like adventures with the first team that died in the very beginning, because I kind of want to see that. I really want to see a movie with that team. It looked amazing, right? Like Disconnecting Man or whatever his name is. I really want to see that. But the important thing here is that's why you didn't really get a whole lot of development in relation to the villains, because literally the next Suicide Squad movie could open up and Idris Elba dies in the first 5 minutes. That's just the nature of the team. Anybody can die at any point in time under virtually any circumstance. They're designed to be throwaway. Having said that, with regards to pretty much everything else in the movie, it was fantastic. It's exactly what I was hoping it would be. A comic book film composed of supervillains that didn't take itself too seriously. I think the biggest issue with the first Suicide Squad film is it didn't feel like that. It felt like they were trying to make like this real, tangible, amazing comic book movie that was in line with something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that's not really what the Suicide Squad is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a movie about villains who can die at any point in time. And who cares? The story is what's important, not really the characters. And James Gunn nailed that. The story was great. I am kind of shocked that they used Starro as the main villain, if I'm being honest. Starro was a Justice League villain, right? That was like the first big thing for the Justice League, was fighting Starro. So I always kind of hoped that Starro would be a villain the Justice League would face off against. Having said that, Starro does seem kind of goofy and kind of silly, and he is. Currently in DC Comics, he's in a jar, so he's called Jarro. Literally, he hangs out with Batman all the time. But it's one of those things where it's kind of like, that's kind of goofy and silly. So maybe Starro really was a great fit for the Suicide Squad because it worked, right? It was cool. It was kind of sad at the end, right? When like Starro died and he was like, I was happy just floating in space staring at the stars. And then humanity came along and screwed it up. I feel like that's James Gunn's just critique on humanity. Like, hey guys, what's one thing humanity's really good at? Screwing stuff up. Awesome. Because we're really good at screwing things up. But that's kind of the craziness about it, right? You know, the movie was fun. It was enjoyable. It was a great popcorn film. I don't know that I would go and see it again. And that's really kind of the interesting thing about it. A lot of people really determine whether or not they consider a movie to be good by whether or not they would go and see it a second time. I saw Infinity War and Avengers Endgame once. And that was enough for me, right? I mean, I was like, this is cool. not gonna go see it again. So that's not really my standard for determining whether or not a movie is good, but I know some of you guys use that standard, so I figured I would go ahead and impart that on you. Having said that, for my standard, did I have a good time? Was I ever bored? Did I find myself yawning over the course of the movie? That's kind of my standard. If I yawn in the movie and I'm not really exhausted, then it's like your movie sucks and it's boring, right? Like The Irishman. I fell asleep during that movie. Twice. That movie was bad. It was bad and it was boring. I'm sorry, Martin Scorsese, you peaked with Goodfellas. But the important thing here is that with the Suicide Squad film, it was great. It was fun. It was enjoyable, right? It's one of those movies you can just kind of go and just have a good time. Just watch some crazy stuff happen. I did love the hyper violence. That's one of the things that I really did enjoy. I felt like there wasn't really enough like dark humor, comedic, like hyper violence like there was, you know, in the first movie. I mean, the first movie, sure, there was violence, but it was more like typical violence, right? Like standard comic book violence, right? Like, I mean, I will say that like, what is it, Deadshot, like shooting up all those zombie monster things, that was like the only good part of the whole movie. Literally, you guys agree? I've seen how many views that video has on YouTube. Everybody loves that scene, right? It's one of the coolest scenes. Nobody cares about any of the other scenes in that movie. But the cool thing is with this film, it's enjoyable. It's good, right? So if what you're looking for is something that doesn't feel like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in the sense that it doesn't feel cookie cutter, formulaic, it's kind of a breakaway. Small hints of Guardians of the Galaxy in there. Chris Pratt did have a cameo. I wonder if you guys spotted it. Small little things like that in there. It's good. It's separate and it's unique and it's interesting and it's fun. And I really believe that James Gunn's portrayal of the Suicide Squad in this movie is almost kind of like his Guardians of the Galaxy thing, right? Like, I can take a ridiculously obscure team that you didn't even know existed until we announced the movie, and I bet I can turn it into like a huge hit. Again, that's the big difference. The entire Guardians of the Galaxy film got a lot of character development. Suicide Squad didn't, right? It was more about the story. So you probably walk away more curious about Starro or maybe probably King Shark. King Shark was the best character in the whole movie. Let's all just admit that. But like, you know, you might walk away with more of a curiosity about Starro and King Shark than anybody else. But the story is what you likely remember the most, because that's the main emphasis of Suicide Squad. So I love that, right? I mean, I think that this movie shows that DC has great characters. They've got great characters. You can do a lot of stuff with their characters. All you need is a competent director. All you need is somebody who can come along and say, hey, I can make great movies with these characters, right? And you're not gonna have to get a special cut in order for that to happen. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.